Sustainable Business Council. I am Susan Anderson. I am the chair of the Education Committee for the Sustainable Business Council. And tonight we are hosting our fourth sustainability shot, our third sustainability shot of the year. We will have one more later in the year. We're glad you could all join us tonight and hope you'll come to some of our other events. I will let you know what they are after we get done with our speaker tonight. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for our SHOT series: Axiom IT Solutions, Livesey All Systems Freight, Missoula Independent, Cherry Creek Radio, MacArthur Means and Wells, and Family Dental Group. Their logos are up here. Cherry Creek Radio also. I managed to miss that one. Please help us support these fine entities with your business. Additionally, tonight, Patty Creek Market, Liquid Planet, Big Sky Brewing, MCAT, and The Loft all provided us with services. If you have any questions about the SBC, you can see the websites over there. Board members in the audience tonight include Lisa Swallow, Miriam Mick, anybody else? And myself, Sue Anderson. And we have a couple interns who I won't go through and introduce all of them, but you're certainly welcome to ask board members questions after the event if you're interested in membership or anything else. Miriam will come chat with you a little bit later as well. Now that I've finished rambling on, I'm going to bring Lisa Swallow up. She's going to introduce our speaker tonight, Peter Schober.
Tonight we are blessed, so to speak, to have with us Peter Schober, Senior Pastor of University Congregational Church. Peter was ordained into the ministry in 1984 and has served UCC and another parish in Washington State. Peter's involved in a multitude of community and faith-based activities. And in particular, he's interested in human rights work, spiritual formation, wilderness issues, and ecumenical and interfaith involvements. The breadth of his involvement is shown by his alliance with a wide variety of ministerial associations, the Missoula Demonstration Project, Partners in Home Health, and Missoula Safe Routes to School. He is the 2006 recipient of the Jeanette Rankin Peacemaker of the Year Award. He and his wife Barbara, sitting over here, have 3 children: Anna Marie, 22, who's also here, a senior at UM, Jane, 19, attends NAU in Flagstaff, and their son Steen, also here, is a sophomore at Hellgate. If you get a chance to spend a few minutes chatting with Peter, I'm sure you will be as moved as I have been by his humor, spirit, serenity, and overall good vibe. Please help me in welcoming Peter Schober.
I hope everybody heard you all right. Here you go, Peter. One microphone.
Thank you, Lisa and Susan. That was sweet. A good vibe. I've never had that. That's kind of cool. So, as I understand it, I have been asked to talk about sustainability, but maybe in terms that it's not thought of very often. Sustainability in the context of spirituality, sustainability in the context of faith communities, and how that experience interfaces with other organizations and that sort of thing. So it's been interesting for me to get my own thoughts together with this and everything. So I thought I'd start though by just saying a few words about who I am. When you're a pastor, it doesn't take long to figure out that you have one of the most kind of odd and confusing professions in the world. I mean, people are always just sort of, well, what do you do, and what's your faith background, and all of that. You know, there's an enormous landscape of faith communities in our culture. In a Christian context, you know, there's the religious right, and there actually is a religious left. It's one of the best kept secrets in our country. But my tradition is called the United Church of Christ, and it's what's called a mainline tradition. Like Presbyterians or Lutherans or United Methodists, the United Church of Christ has been around for quite some time. we're sort of on the progressive end of the mainline traditions, and then within Protestantism there's a whole host of different evangelical churches as well, and then oftentimes the third part of the American Christian context are the Roman Catholic churches, and then of course also the Eastern Orthodox churches. So that's kind of where I'm at and where I'm coming from. My tradition is a tradition that has been very, very involved in social change issues for a long time. We are a tradition that has ordained women for, since 1852, and we ordain openly gay and lesbian folks and started doing that 20, 30 years ago. So we're kind of unique with all of that, but that's my tribe. That's where I come from. And so I know for a lot of people, progressive church is an oxymoron, but for many of us, it's just normal. That's just what we've done for a long, long time. So that's where I'm coming from. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the macro realities that we're in today in terms of the religious landscape. I just think this is a stunning time for religious movements in America. We hear a lot about the religious right, and it is a very, very powerful dynamic in our culture, but there's all kinds of things going on. I remember I oftentimes say, if somebody would have told me in the early 1970s that tattoos and fundamentalism were going to make a big comeback, I would have said, no way, But we live in a time when fundamentalism, not only in our own country, but in a global context, is making an amazing impact on the world. At the same time, there's a sort of a counterbalancing impact going on as well between the progressive elements and the more fundamental elements, between the religious right and the religious left. A growing non-faith-based community is a very real part of our landscape as well. And but it's just a very, very interesting time. I think there's some huge sort of paradigm shifts going on in our culture religiously. We've got this emerging fundamentalism, what seems to be a very sustaining and growing religious right, but at the same time there's all kinds of movements going on. We live in the most religiously pluralistic culture in the history of the world, in the United States. And we don't hear a lot about that, but we really do. There's no other place in the globe that has as many religious traditions as we do. I think there's more Hindus in America now than there are Episcopalians. It's all just changed. And I know as a good Episcopalian that makes you sad, but it's okay. But it is, it poses this unbelievable challenge, but also this fabulous opportunity to become a different people in a different way. And there's all kinds of resistance to it, and there's all kinds of openness to it at the same time. And how's it going to play out? It's quite unclear. But there's the sort of the exclusive approach to religious practice. And then there's this radically inclusive approach. And what are we going to be as a people? What are we going to sustain ourselves with? And, it's a big question mark, I think, at this point. Lots of times people talk about, spiritual warfare, which to me is an oxymoron. But, who will we end up being? So that's sort of one of the things I think is going on. At the same time, another important shift, I think, is that we're moving into a whole new time. People talk a lot about being in a postmodern era. They talk a lot about being kind of in a post-Enlightenment time, that we're moving from dualistic ways of thinking into more unitive ways of thinking. And I see that happening, at least in my tradition. And in terms of sustainability, That unitive way of thinking, a reclaiming of wisdom traditions, not putting everything in sort of a rationalistic context, speaks to me about what sustainability and a spirit of sustainability is predicated upon. So it's really an interesting time. I had some fun this week thinking about different ways of thinking about sustainability. You've got environmental sustainability, which I think looks at it through the lens of biology and science. You've got economic sustainability, which might look at it more through the lens of the marketplace. We've got sustainability as a lifestyle, which is perhaps has a lot to do with sociology. But when you look at sustainability through spiritual lenses, what do you come up with? How do we sustain ourselves spiritually? How do we imagine what that might represent? It's interesting. You know, what is a sustainable spirituality? When do we live out non-sustainable spiritualities? And so I asked myself, how am I sustained, other than with food, water, and air? What about being sustained relationally or theologically? Are my spiritual practices sustaining or not? How is my faith sustaining or not? I think we need to think in those terms as well. And so I find myself wondering if this whole sustainability issue is a time for faith communities to discover it, or is it a time for faith communities to remember it? And you know, you look at the history of religious experience, you know, and not just in a Judeo-Christian context, but in many ways, you look at the ground of sustainability that it seemed to emerge from. You know, it comes out of a pre-industrial context, an agrarian society where people were interconnected in ways that we can only imagine today. We live so radically individuated and so radically consumer-based that it's hard for us to even imagine where that primal narrative came from. It's that different. But, you know, I started thinking about some of the sustainable models that have been developed through religious groups. The whole monastic tradition remarkably embodies sustainable concepts of sharing things, of only consuming what you have right there. You think of ashrams in India, or you think of kibbutzes in Israel, you think of Mennonites and Moravians, all kinds of different religious groups who, through their faith, live sustainable lifestyle. It's just the way it is. And it's been that way for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think, largely speaking, in our culture today, faith communities have forgotten that. We sort of look at people who live out those lives as these kind of oddities, you know, little pets who, you know, harken back to, you know, an earlier day, but now that earlier day is reasserting itself in many ways. I see how the voluntary simplicity movement is impacting a lot of progressive churches. It's really, you know, sort of striking a deep chord, not only in terms of their politics, but I think also in terms of their theology. So we are called to live this way. We are called as a people to resist the powers of a radically individuated, radically consumer-based, oftentimes militaristic culture. And the ways that we can do that is to embody lifestyle choices that are consistent with our faith convictions. And it is happening, and it's exciting, I think, to see it. I think about traditions embedded in the core traditions of the faith, like Sabbath. Sabbath is actually a very radical concept. You rest on the seventh day. You don't work. You give your fields a day off. You treat people differently. Every 7th year you have a sabbatical. Every 50th year you have the Jubilee year. It's a wonderful notion. 7 times 7, the 50th year, is a year when all debts were forgiven, all the slaves were to be freed, and all lands were to be returned to their rightful owners. This was just sort of basic stuff that we forgot. And now there's people saying, oh, we need to remember that. We need to remember the Sabbath. We need to lift up all of these injunctions against mistreating the poor, the widow, and the stranger. We need to reclaim biblical notions of stewardship, which is a biblical notion. We steward the land. We need to give the other side to what is sometimes called dominion theology. There's a phrase in the book of Genesis about humankind having dominion over the earth, and really it depends how you interpret that. And then I think the most overlooked core belief that we need to reclaim is the whole core teaching from Jesus on nonviolence. Gandhi said everybody in the world understands Jesus' teaching on nonviolence except the Christians. And I think that's very true. And my sense is the two huge issues that are theologically going to confront the Christian church in this century will be nonviolence and simplicity. Resisting the consumer machine. And those are two areas where people in that faith tradition have to reclaim that sacred story. And not as something that's peripheral, but rather something that's very central to what that tradition of faith is all about. The notion of nonviolence, which isn't certainly limited only to Christianity, it's a global interfaith teaching, has remarkable implications for our environment. Nonviolence is not simply an anthropomorphic notion between people. We cannot be a nonviolent people if we do violence to the earth. We don't separate out violence from the earth and people. It's all part of that unitive understanding. We are a part of this whole ecology, and it's important for us to remember that. Couple things. Was asked to talk about what we're doing in the church I serve, and other churches in town are doing lots of things, but just as an example, we're trying to do a lot in terms of becoming a more sustainable faith community. We sort of have a four-pronged approach. We started a visioning process a couple of years ago. It's really been a wonderful experience. And one of the things that we lifted up was the need for us as a community of faith to go deeper in becoming a greener congregation, and in terms of helping each other to live out sustainable lifestyles. And so that vision is morphing and changing along with some of the other visions that we're doing. But we're talking a lot about facility and building issues, doing energy audits, upgrading different things. We're going to be, this year, I think, replacing a lot of our lights. We have a lot of practices that we're trying to embody that are sort of administrative, but really taking recycling more seriously, composting kitchen waste, really trying to cut back on energy usage and paper usage and that sort of thing. Thirdly, we're really trying to encourage people to look at their lives and the way we live them. Are we living in sustainable ways? Are we living out sustainable lifestyles? Are we living out sustainable spiritualities? And then fourthly, our role is doing advocacy work, you know, locally in Helena. Nationally, our church is real active with different environmental issues. We're involved Claudia's done a lot in helping to organize a group here in town that's an ecumenical effort called Green Our Faith. Presently, there's like 10 churches that are working together, trying to figure out ways, how can we lift up this message and live out its promise? And how can we do that in partnership with other groups? We're probably going to morph into a different name. There's a national group called the Interfaith Power and Light, and we'll be creating a statewide group with that. But one of the things that strikes me is that it's not just, when I think of sustainability, it's not just a state of doing things, it's a way of being. And there's a difference between, you know, doing and being. It comes, I think, when we try to be that, it comes from a place of deep conviction, and it means all kinds of different things to us. And I think the possibilities are pretty unlimited. Last night at a meeting, you know, Lent is coming up. Lent is the season prior to Easter, and so it's a time when a lot of churches do a lot of educational things, and you really go into a time of deeper reflection. You're supposed to go out into the desert and empty out and discern, you know, what's most important to you. And so we always try to come up with a clever little theme, you know, for every Lenten season. And so at a group last night we came up with one, and it ended up being, I thought it was really interesting, it's just a 2-word theme: daily bread. So what's the daily bread? You know, what are we really sustained by? And what is our daily bread other than literally bread? You know, what are we deeply fed on? What's our daily bread in terms of meaning and passion and our yearnings and hopes and all of that? So, you know, I see that as a way that a community of faith can take seriously what sustainability might represent. Sustainability is not just about economics. It's not about technologies or sociologies. It's also about spirituality. And I think we all, whatever tradition we might or might not be a part of, we all need to develop that. What is our spirituality of sustainability? What keeps us going? What has meaning? What's life-giving and what's life-diminishing? We need to name that, I think, and we need to claim it. And I think we also, while we're doing that, have to do a reclamation project with the inheritance that we've already been given. Our foremothers and forefathers have taught us how to take care of each other and to take care of the earth. We need to remember that and to bring that moral force into the complexities of technology and environmental devastation. So I think there's all kinds of strategies that go along with attempting to go deeper and be real with sustainability. We've been talking a little bit lately about the need to bring together our roles and our souls. We all have all kinds of roles that we live out in life, and we do it, you know, that's the doing part of it. But how often do we bring our souls into those roles? And if we don't, we end up living pretty divided lives. We're not grounded. We're not centered and balanced. One of the key things I wanted to lift up tonight, and I think this is really helpful for me to remember, and I think it really helps maybe with that interface with spirituality of sustainability and businesses and other organizations. When we talk about sustainability, when we talk about environmental degradation, we oftentimes speak about it in a way that doesn't create significant change in people's minds or hearts. So I've been thinking about how when we talk about these issues, we talk and we talk and we talk, and we have lots of facts that we convey to people. But on some level, while facts really do inform us, we have to remember that it's values that transform us. And I think that's particularly difficult for those of us in the progressive community to accept. You know, we really think, well, you know, if you really understood how this global warming thing works, then you'd change your life. Well, people tune out. You know, facts inform, but values transform. And I think that it's very, very important for us when we're dealing with a language of values, that we understand that that's a language of the soul. It's not just the analytical, calculative approach to things. It's not just scientific. It causes us to spread ourselves out more broadly and to go more deeply inside. And that can be a difficult thing to do when we're talking about social issues. But if we don't do that, I think we have separated our souls from our roles. And I think that that's something that's important for all of us to remember. Where did I run into the line? I think it was a film I saw, or a speaker I heard. It was talking about another world is possible. You know, I think we hear that a lot when it comes to environmental presentations and whatnot, that there is another world possible, that it doesn't have to be the way it is, that we can create change, and it can be lasting and life-giving. And it's kind of a mantra today. And I think it's also a statement of hope. And as a pastor, hope isn't just a word for me. I deal in hope, and it's very real. I know it's real. It's a conviction. It's an experience, and I think it's what Dr. King was talking about when he said the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I believe that. And I believe when we're talking about issues like this, we have to be a part of that long arc. And we have to be part of the bending. And to trust that that's real. To recognize that hope is real. And if we're going to create change, we have to be people of hope. And we all have a very important role to play with that. But I think most of us know that our roles get burned out and emptied quickly if we don't have our souls opened up to feed them. And for that, we have to have each other in all of our wonderful differences. We need a story to hold on to that's about freedom and justice for all people. And as we're becoming increasingly aware, justice for the earth. And with that, we're not talking about just understanding the information, but having a vision and being able to communicate our values deeply. So each of us alone and all of us together might be part of a healing transformation of both our roles and our souls and of this good gift called Earth. So thank you for giving me this time. But do we have some time for discussion? Lisa, do we have time?
Absolutely. So it's
Okay.
just a roundtable forum. Please bring up anything that's on your mind with each other, with Peter.
Well, you hit it out of the ballpark again. It's fabulous.
Well, I just really find it interesting to think about something like sustainability, not in, sort of a clinical, oh God, we have to do this, we have to fix this problem. There's a great image, it's kind of a Buddhist image, but I think it applies all over the place. They talk about big mind and small mind. And we spend most of our lives in small mind. Small mind is all the efforts we put forward to kind of make the river run the way we want to. All the ways we try to fix, understand, and control everything. It's a very Western, rationalistic thing to do. Big mind is when you let the river flow. And I think we really tend to, in a lot of our environmental stuff, in so many of our efforts with sustainability, we bring small mind into it, forgetting our souls, forgetting that there's a larger rhythm out there. And we end up thinking that, we're in charge. We can fix and understand and control everything. And, it's kind of an arrogance. But it sure is interesting to think about this stuff, I think, in a theological context, in terms of like spiritual practices. Right? Sustainability really suggests a lot, I think, with that. Phil?
Your comments are prompting my intuition and my brain both going in 100 directions at once. And there's a sort of a question here, if I can put pieces together to actually make it a question. And it has to do with being a part of having been born into a culture in which abundance is the norm, material abundance. And part of that then is, as we go along in life, we expect it. And beyond expecting it, it becomes something that seems indispensable. For example, I'm not sure I could get along without a computer in it. And it's not that I didn't at one time in my life, but now there's so much I do with it, from information to communication to whatever else. So that level of material well-being is plainly way above what would be the average across the planet. Some years ago, a study in Vancouver, BC was done looking at the consumption of, or what it took material-wise to sustain, how do they put it? What was the average amount of material resources people consumed? I think across from everybody from the bums on the waterfront to the richest people, and whatever that average was, multiplied it by, at that time, just over 5 billion people on the earth, and concluded that to sustain everybody on the whole planet at that average would take 2.5 planets. And when I look at me and I say, well, I'm probably somewhere close to that average. I'm surely not above that. Maybe I'm a hair below that even. And I think, of all of these pieces, that in my sense of spirituality and the way you describe, and you didn't use the word accountability, but I would throw that in, as a kind of accountability to this life environment in which I'm born. I've got way too much. I'm using more than my share. And that's then, in the way I've cast it, the pickle that perhaps we're all in. Without, pardon my, if there are Catholics in the bunch, my apologies for the stereotype of Catholics being carrying guilt-ridden. That's the guilt of consciousness. I'm aware that I'm consuming more than my fair share, and I don't feel emotionally capable of shedding to a point where I'm only consuming what I think would be my 1/6 billionth person share of the planet. And so it leads me to say, well, I'll do the best I can. And so that's part of the question. Do we all just say, well, I'm doing the best I can, knowing that it really isn't very good? Number one. And number two, when you look at others, and the bank bailout is a fine example. You read now that, you know, the CEO of was it Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, in a 6-year period made $63 million. His personal compensation in an 8-year period, and that's in a government-supported financial institution. And we say, well, do I have a responsibility in regard to all these others whose consumption makes me look like a pauper? So the two pieces of the question, you know, is enough, and should I do better than just, well, that's all I can do? And what about my responsibility to these serious, massive consumers?
Yeah. I think of two things. The first one is, I remember reading once that one of the primary foundational teachings of any spirituality, you know, in an interfaith context, is that notion that we are all called to love what we already have, which I think is kind of counter to our culture. But
just say that one more time.
that a foundational spiritual teaching in an interfaith, you know, all around the world, is the notion that we are called to love what we already have. You know, instead of always, you know, falling in love with the next best thing. You know, loving what we have is a spiritual practice. The other thing I think of, Phil, is, you know, in terms of creating change, the older I get, the more convinced I become that I can't do that on my own. That I need to do that with other people in whatever community we're talking about. And I think that that is particularly true in terms of simplifying our lives, because there is such a mighty force for us to be addicted to consumerism that, you know, you have to, you know, it's like an act of resistance. And doing that alone is very, very hard. Doing that together is much easier. And so I think that's why they talk about circles of simplicity and whatnot. We have to support each other with this, because our culture will not. We can't do it alone. At least I can't. And I'm someone who loves, you know, contemplative practice and solitude, but I'm always reminded of how much more powerful contemplative practice and the experience of solitude is in community. And I think we live in an unbelievably individuated, consumer-based, violent culture. And
Consumer-based what?
Violent. You know, I remember, I mean, Dr. King, you know, all these years ago said, you know, there's the 3 legs of injustice that we have to deal with. Poverty, racism, and militarism. Who talks about that today? Yeah. Lisa?
Well, I'm really interested in this idea of uniting progressive Christians around these issues. As you said earlier, the religious right has so much political clout and so much financial and economic power, and they, I think, unite their congregations from the pulpit on issues that are antithetical to what we're talking about tonight. And I love the idea that we have this interfaith power and light that's a national movement, and I just want to thank you for speaking to sustainability from the pulpit and for recognizing that progressive Christian isn't an oxymoron.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the realities, and this isn't just in terms of progressive Christians, but I think in the progressive movement in general across our country, we have lost our language. We have done a very, very poor job of expressing our moral ground. We've become quietistic. We have become oppositional instead of proactive. And we're not taken very seriously. Or you're not even known, you know. It's, and I feel that in a, I think there is some very difficult things that are going on to keep the progressive religious traditions quiet in our country. In my own context, Obama's church, Jeremiah Wright, he's a United Church of Christ pastor. I've met Jeremiah. He's a remarkable human being. Did he make some mistakes? Well, yeah, I would assume so. Was he anything close to how he was portrayed in the press? No. He lifts up what is called a liberation theology. It's a wonderful theological tradition that comes out of the experience of suffering. Well, there are a lot of people that don't want other people to hear about that. But we have to reclaim our voice. And that doesn't have anything to do with fundamentalists or evangelicals or whatever. That has to do with us. We have to have the courage of our convictions. And I think we have sort of lost that. And that's why I think that point about, facts inform, but values transform. We have to talk about our values. We have to be able to stand on our moral ground and not to be there arrogantly or violently, but to be there with our convictions. And I think on the progressive side of things, we oftentimes forget that.
I read a blog called Climate Progress by Joe Romm, and then Bill McKibben has a book called Earth, EAARTH, and what I'm and other sources, and what I'm reading is that we're running out of time. Everything is converging, all the different dynamics and issues, they're all converging. So I'm kind of, it's a challenge.
It's such a challenge, Yes. One of the concerns I have is that oftentimes the language that gets used in the progressive environmental community in a paradoxical sort of way sounds very close to the apocalyptic language that fundamentalists use.
It's important to separate those, though.
Well, I know, but it's also important to recognize that, they sound the same.
Well,
And, that's something we need to...
And a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it can be,
Fire and flood and drought, I mean, that's pretty much.
Yeah.
Why is it? Why are they why can't they be related?
Well, I think they come out of two very different traditions that sort of end up sounding pretty. Apocalyptic literature, as it gets interpreted in a literalistic context by some more conservative traditions, really talks about the apocalypse, the end of the earth, as a thing that isn't necessarily a bad thing. And then through that apocalypse, you're going to have the second coming of Christ. And
Which is hope.
Which can be very hopeful, depending on a person's theological convictions. But it's paradoxical to me that people without, who aren't necessarily fueled by a religious conviction or vision, end up sort of using apocalyptic language that for many people sounds, they don't make the separation. It's just, to me, it's the paradoxical dynamic that's going on. Yeah.
but it's in facing what's there that we really can transcend, and that we really can deal with it successfully by facing it.
But
And we have to do it with light. Projecting light is essential.
Yeah, lifting up hope, lifting up, if it's all, sort of doom and gloom and it's hopeless, that obviously
Well, you
isn't.
can't look at it from that way.
But, you wonder how people are reacting to language about, let's say, global warming today as compared to how they did, 3 years ago or something. There's been some changes, and it's interesting to look at all that stuff. But
Except the Montana legislature.
Yeah.
I mean, we are going back in time to the 19th century with them. It's appalling, and that they would, and I kind of feel like the progressives are overwhelmed of how it's just so incredibly stupid. I mean, we have this amazing thing in our Constitution. You have the right to a clean and healthful environment, which is basically you have the right to live. And that they would take that out and put in the economy into it. The guns, it's just on every level. And I don't, it's almost, it feels overwhelming. Like, how do you begin to counter that? And maybe it'll fall on its own weight because they were supposed to be doing the economy and they aren't doing the economy. They're off on tangents. But I don't feel like we're meeting what is a great threat in taking away what has been proposed as solutions to global warming, like NEPA and rights established in our Constitution.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, how many of you read that George Lakoff book? He's the guy that talked a lot about how progressives need to reframe how we talk about things. Everything tends to be reacting to, those crazy people trying to do this. Well, what are we affirming? What is our vision? So that people say, yes, I want to be a part of that vision. This is a good thing to protect the earth. It's a good thing to talk about sustainability. It's not in opposition to what other people may or may not feel, because this is just a positive, life-giving thing. And we have to find the language to convey that. And I think we have failed. I think that we do just sort of a poor job of proclaiming that biblical vision of shalom, which is this kind of broader notion of peace with justice, with some sense of equilibrium. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But why can't we live out of that instead of living out of our anger and living out of our fears and all of the kind of oppositional impulses that have been bred into us?
You indicated when you were talking that what you sensed would be where spirituality would move was simplicity of nonviolence. Could you elaborate on the nonviolence piece of that?
Okay. My sense is that those are two of the radically undervalued foundational teachings of the faith tradition that I try to follow. The practice of nonviolence has a remarkably long and wonderful history that we have tended to overlook. I think that it isn't just a political and social strategy. I think it is a way of living. And we have great teachers, like Gandhi and Dr. King, who I think understood that. We have to change we not only have to live out the role of being invited into living nonviolently, but that has to take anchor in our souls. So, we don't just try to do that, we try to be that. And I think that there's terrific implications for issues of sustainability with that. Just think of all the ways that we do little acts of violence to ourselves and, to our well-being by the way we might consume, or the way we try to do 14 things at once. Is that a sustainable, nonviolent way of living? No, I think it does a lot of violence. At least it does to me. And
so if something is against your own well-being that you're doing yourself to yourself, that may be perceived as violence. What Molly just brought up about the guns and the money taking over the legislative debate, those things seem very much to me connected to some sort of violent, angry, fearful sort of. I don't know much about the ramifications.
oh gosh, there's just remarkable stuff out there on, and what I know best is Christian nonviolence, but nonviolence in all kinds of faith traditions, and what a transformative opportunity it is, in a social setting, but also I think individually, outwardly, but also inwardly. And but I think it's also true, when I mentioned that Gandhi said the only people that don't seem to understand Jesus' teachings on nonviolence are the Christians. Well, it's kind of true. Because we, have so ignored or kind of avoided that teaching. So, Bill.
Something of a follow-up on that in your previous comment, where the point you made was in the effect of you have to bring nonviolence into your soul as a conscious choice, or words to that effect. So the question is it your belief that what amounts to the soul, the essence of being of everybody, is absent of these values, and it requires us to make conscious choices to bring them in? Or, and I'll confess this is more my belief, that it's the natural character of the soul to be simpatico with all the life forms, to be nonviolent, to be respectful, and that somehow in the conduct of our lives we get away from that. And the reason for the question, particularly other than just an interesting, whether it's a spiritual or metaphysical question, is when we think about Molly's question kind of gets to the whole political universe or the religious right. Are we approaching from the standpoint of, can you people bring something into your soul that's not there? Or are we talking about, can you uncover something that's already there and just give it life?
Another image I really like a lot, and I try to use it a lot in my own life, is sometimes it's called Jesus' third way, or the third way, that the ways of the world, the first two ways of the world, are to fight or to flee. And, we all do that in all kinds of ways. The third way is the nonviolent embrace of our enemies. And not wanting to demonize people, but your enemy could be your best friend who you're in conflict with at that time. How do we nonviolently embrace the other? And how do we do that in the legislature? How do we do that in the tribal wars between different religious traditions? How do we do that with ourselves? How do we embrace the dark side of, our own souls? And but that's not a task that you can perform and be done with. That's something you have to awaken to every day. every day. And to me, that speaks of some expression of sustainability, but it is wedded to spiritual practice. You know, it's a spiritual practice for me to try to remember the third way, because I forget every day. And but that's why I need other people to remind me of it too, and a tradition that does and stuff. So.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, I'd like you to help me thank Peter for this wonderful presentation. So thank you to Peter. He's at the University Congregational Church. If you want to go hear him play again. Wasn't quite the right word. Speak again.
Kind of like a rock star.
You'll know where to find him. I want to thank our sponsors for the whole entire SHOT series. Axiom, IT Solutions, LaVistiel Systems Freight, Cherry Creek Radio, the Family Dental Group, MacArthur Means and Wells, and the Missoula Independent. I'm a little slow tonight. Too much of the good wine from Liquid Planet, I'm afraid. Patty Creek Food, Liquid Planet, Big Sky Brewing, the Missoula Community Access Television. For those of you who are watching us, you obviously know that. And The Loft were all our service providers tonight, and they did a great job. The food and wine is fantastic. Those of you watching, you might want to try and come down to one of these times, because they are wonderful. If you want to know more about the Sustainable Business Council, you can get us at either www.sustainablebusinesscouncil.org or www.sbcmontana.org. Both of those addresses will work. It's one and the same website. And finally, we have some other events coming up that we wanted you to know about. Next week on Thursday, we have our Strive Towards Sustainability workshop. We've been giving these workshops for our members for over a year. This is the first one we're making available to the public. If you are interested in joining us for that workshop, you can email sts@sustainablebusinesscouncil.org to put in an RSVP. Space is limited to about 20 people, so you need to get in on that right away. I think we're about half full right now. It's 8:30 to noon next Thursday. I won't tell you the location because we don't want people to show up unless we know you're coming. And we'd love to have you join us. For non-members, it will be $50 to join us for that event. March 10th, we will have our last sustainability shot in our series. It will be getting goods from here to there, sustainable business transportation options with State Senator Dave Wanzenreed. It will be here at the Loft again at 5:30 for refreshments, 6 o'clock for the presentation. On Wednesday, April 27th, we are really excited. We will have Andy Mangan from the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development here in Missoula. The School of Business is co-hosting that lecture with us. It will be at 6 p.m. in the evening in the Gallagher Business Building, room 106. Our sponsors for that are D.A. Davidson, the School of Business, and Cherry Creek Radio, and we're really excited because this is, he's going to come tell us how to make a sustainable business community from their perspective of working with communities all over the country. And they have some pretty big projects dealing with green building, green water, green energy, so we're very excited about that event. And finally, we're going to have our 3rd annual Garden City Local Fest at Caris Park on May 14th, and we hope you'll all come down and support our local businesses there. It says welcome. We really want to thank you for joining us tonight for the Sustainability Shot, and hopefully you'll join us again either here at the Loft or on MCAP. Thanks.